So as you can see on this README side over here, this would be, in an ideal world, we will get through all of this today. If we don't make it through all of it, it's okay. We can continue on tomorrow. Tomorrow's focus will be doing CRUD. And so if we need to push some of the form stuff to the CRUD section, totally fine, not a big deal. But we'll try to get through as much as we can. So went with Chris's idea, and we're going to be making a project to keep track of our shoes. And we're going to start simple. So we're just going to start with one model, and it will be our shoe model. So the first thing we need to do in any Rails lab or any Rails project is going to be very, very similar to what we had to do in Sinatra. So what was the first thing you had to do in Sinatra when you got to a lab? Like at least the later on labs. Usually any Sinatra lab, what was the first thing you had to do? Perfect. We need to set up our database. That's always, it's going to be the same thing in Rails. So we've got some familiarity here. We don't have to move away from things that we've done so far. Normally you will use a generator, but because we want to start simple and we'll start small, we're actually going to do them by hand today. So I'm going to make a new folder called migrate inside of our DB. Why does that look like that didn't work? Oh, there it goes. Whew. I was like, why is that? And why is that not working? And then we're just going to do a new file, and we're going to go real simple. And we're going to call it create shoes. We will do it plural because remember, we're going to be dealing with plural tables, singular models. And then in here, we'll actually create our migration. And to be very honest with you guys, sometimes I forget how to write all of this stuff. So if I write anything wrong in setting up this migration, please catch me. So we'll call our class, our migration class, create shoes, and then it will inherit from active record migration. So far, so good. We have absolutely no changes from Sinatra. The one change is we couldn't have done rake db create migration. That's not one of the rake tasks available, which is why we went back to this old school way of actually writing out 001 as the name of our migration file. So that's like the one big difference. You will have generators to do that for you in a little bit. And then we will make our change method. I always do my defs and my ends together, and I'm gonna mess this up. Create table. We'll want to name it plural shoes, do, and then our T. This is all going to be set up very similar, so I'm kind of going fast with this because this is our repetitive piece. I just want you to know that this is what we'll start with. And I actually have already made a seed file because I wanted to speed up some of I wanted us to have information to display when we work on a index page. So given that, we can see here that we have 4 attributes that we need to deal with. It looks like what's the data? We've got 2 different data types going on here. Our first one is going to be string, and we'll do string for the majority of these. So we'll do string for brand. Let's just copy and paste, make our life a little bit easier. Color and condition. And then we'll go ahead and do an integer. We can always add more things to this later. So it might become, we want to add some other stuff, make it interesting. That's something that we can definitely do. And before I migrate it, I actually don't know if it will cause any issues. I was going to say, I think we want our model to be there before we migrate it, but I'm not, you know what? I actually don't know if we need it to be there first. So let's just see if it gives us an error that it can't find the matching model. I think it might. It's always interesting when you predict what the error is going to be and you might not even get it right, or you might. Anyways, we'll need a matching model. So while my computer takes a second to do its migration, we'll come over to models, and same thing, we'll just make a new file and call it, yeah, we got an error. Whew. I was really hoping we would get an error. So that's good. We'll save this as shoe.rb. And this piece I could never remember, and I might actually have to, this one we're going from active record base still. The good news is these, is that correct? Yes. Yes, I have to like second guess myself on some of those. These parts you really won't have to memorize at the end of the day. Like it's good at the beginning to have like a reference sheet, but at the end of the day, a lot of these come from generators, which is why sometimes I have trouble remembering what exactly inherits from what. So this should be our shoe class. And let's see, I think our error is going to be that it doesn't have a model. Or because I didn't put, okay, this is actually a different thing. It's just because I didn't specify what version of active record we're inheriting from. You might have seen that error as well as you've been working. Oh, that's really going to error. Stop it. There we go. So first thing first, we haven't really done any changes from what you're used to. We'll just set up our model and our class, our model and our table, I mean. Beyond that, one of the first labs that you guys are going to do, they have you add some methods to the model. And this is really to emphasize that our model can still be used in a way, thinking all the way back to CLI, we can add custom methods in here. I am curious, what are the methods that we already have for an instance of a shoe? Will anyone just name out a few methods that we already have for a shoe instance?
All the,
oh. Go for it. Say it, Mike.
I was going to say all the attribute accessors for the color brand.
Yes, everything that's on the table. Also, I will say I do actually really appreciate it when you guys unmute yourself, because the recording is so much more enjoyable when you're like, because I might forget to say out what you put in the chat, so the recording is better if you hear people say the answer. So thank you, Mike. But yes, any of our readers and writers from the table, and then we have class methods like the ones that Andrew said, new, create, finder, create by, find by, dot all. We have a bunch of methods in here already. I want us to add one more method. A lot of times the way I want us to display our shoes is I'm going to very frequently over and over again want to see written out like Nike pink, because I mean, who like, you might have a ton of Nike shoes. We need some clarification of what it looks like. Yes, we could just write it out twice in a row, but it is a little bit easier if we write a cut, if we know we're going to do something over and over and over again, to actually have another instance method that makes it a little bit easier for us to grab that stuff. Only matters if we're going to use it multiple times, but I'm telling you right now, multiple times I want us to be able to say like, you know, Puma green, or something like that, so we can see this full string written out. So if that's what we're going for, I want you guys to help me write another instance method for it, and we're going to call it brand and color. So we're just starting simple. We'll come back and we'll add a more difficult one later. But how would this look in my model? We don't want to forget about how we add extra methods to the model.
It would be self.brand plus your in a string of space, hyphen space.
Oh yeah, I forgot that I said let's put
and then self.color.
Exactly. And I want you to know you could also write it, we could also write it with interpolation, but I think I always forget it does that for me. Honestly, it's whatever is easier to you. There's more than one way to do this. I think it's a little bit easier to type this first way, but both ways are appropriate. So I'm going to just comment out the second way, so that you know that if you're looking back on these, both ways here are acceptable as a way to write these. Perfect. So that's pretty simple. One other method that I wanted for the model, and this one's going to be a little bit trickier, is I really want a method that will find the most expensive shoe. So if I'm looking to find the most expensive shoe, my first question, would the most expensive shoe, would that be an instance method? And I know I'm just going to write it, but we can still add self. Would it be an instance method or a class method? I've got a few people in the chat saying a class method. Would anyone like to unmute themselves and elaborate on why they think this might be a class method? You are correct. Oh, that's okay, Lucy.
We're looking at all the shoes and picking one. So
Yeah.
all the shoes in the class.
Yeah, we are looking at individual attributes, but we need access to all of the shoes, and based on all the shoes, we're going to narrow it down to one. And so we do need to look at a class level scope. So we can write a class level method similar to this. And this gets a little bit tricky, our code inside of here. We're going to use basic Ruby. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that later on, this is going to be a method that we will refactor into using SQL. But right now, just thinking about our Ruby tools and Ruby tools only, how might we approach this? I will say, I know we need to start with all, but what might we need to do after we've grabbed all the shoes? What could be a good enumerator that we have available to us with Ruby arrays that allows us to select one item? Actually, I don't know if we want to select one item. That's probably the wrong way to do this. Yeah, let's do a sort. A find, I know, Rakshan, I was the one who said, let's select one item, and a find would. But I realized that we can't just find one because we don't know what the most expensive number is. So we'll go ahead and we will sort by. And in our sort by, the nice thing about this is it will take in our argument of this is going to be a shoe instance because we're looking at one item in the array at a time, and we will sort by shoe dot price. And because price is an integer, it will naturally sort by that pretty easily. And then maybe we just want one, so we might say something like first. Now,
So like,
yeah, go for it.
So like when I was just like thinking, so like in SQL we do something like that and do like a limit of one probably, right?
Yes. And SQL is actually the better way to approach this, but we're going to leave that for a later lesson because it does come up later in the curriculum. So yes, Rakshan, great comment. So I want to test this, but I don't really have anything built out in my views yet. So the way I'm going to test this is I'm going to go ahead and seed my data. Hopefully I have no typos in there, and that will, I actually haven't practiced. I didn't see if the seed worked because I hadn't migrated yet. So hopefully it seeds. Again, apologize how slow my terminal goes in these study groups. And once we seed it, we're going to use the console to test, because I think it's important that you guys feel comfortable using the console to test your models and your relationships. And like we'll use the console very frequently when we're setting up models, model methods, relationships, because it's a better place to see your result, because you know that you haven't, like, your result isn't being interfered by maybe somehow that you messed up in your routes or somehow you messed up in your controller. You know that you're testing exactly these things. So we'll go into our Rails console with just Rails C. And computer's going to try my patience all day today. Come on, console. And well, I'll go ahead and show you guys what I seeded in. So we would expect, if our sort by our most expensive is working correctly, this is the shoe that we would like to get back because they are by far the most expensive. And so that'll be our first test, is we'll just see if we get that shoe back. So I'll say shoe dot most. Now I'm regretting calling it most expensive shoe. I probably just should have called it most expensive, but that's okay. And what happened? What went wrong here? And I am going to just change this to most expensive for next time we test it. This is their Adidas shoe, and I'll show you our seeds. Our Adidas is actually the cheapest. How do I reverse that sort? So it looks like it did sort it, but it sorted it the wrong way. Or what could I change in here? What's the easiest way to change this? Oh, I've already got it in the chat. You guys are on top of it. We need the last instead. One little handy trick, if you're in the console, instead of exiting all the way and restarting it, if you want it to reload the code you just changed, you can type reload exclamation mark, and it much more quickly reloads your console so you don't have to totally kill it and restart. And now it should have my updated, we just called it most expensive, and we should see newtons. Great job, folks. We made it. Yeah, we could do like a max buy. There's definitely like a bunch of different ways that we could make this happen. The other thing that we want to test is that brand and color is working. So let's just select a shoe. Let's just iterate over all of them. And all we're going to do is we're going to print that out. So we'll just do a puts shoe.brand and color to make sure it looks okay. It would be better if I put puts instead of put. And so it does, remember, in each always will return the original array. Here's our original array, but it did print out very nicely exactly what we wanted to see. So both of our methods are working great. Just another thing to point out, this is also a place where you can always do something like shoe.methods, and you're gonna get a crazy long list, but it is a helpful, and like this is really crazy long, but if you're ever curious, it's kind of an interesting thing to go through to see what methods you have available. One other little hint or trick that I like that I want to show you about the console is there is this thing called Pretty Print, and you type pp and then you can do like shoe.all, and what we're going to get is we'll still get the normal way it gets printed, but we also get it printed out, so it's so much easier to see. So again, just to show you, if I did shoe.all, it just looks like a mess and it's really hard to read through there and see how many options you have. If you type pp and then, which stands for Pretty Print, shoe.all, you'll get them in this really, really nice looking array. So just a good little thing to have in your back pocket as you're working in the console. Cool, so I think we're ready to move on from models. I feel like models are the most straightforward because you guys have been working with them a lot, but I do want to just ask, are there any questions about how to work with models in Rails? Okay, so we're going to move on to our next task. I'm going to have you guys help me with it a little bit. Our next task is we want to make an index route. And like I said, we're going to do everything really by hand today. So that means that in our routes file, we are going to not use resources. We are going to write our route by hand. What do we need to do to write this route by hand? What is our syntax? And also, just as a heads up, this thing that you usually see in your routes file will give you the syntax of how to write routes. So if anyone forgets, and that means I'm going to paste it, and everyone should be able to answer this question, but that's just a useful resource for how to write your routes if you forget at all. So how would I write my route for my index? What do I start with? Again, if yeah, go for it, Mike. Oh yeah. Okay, cool. So we start with a get. By RESTful routing conventions, what would the like URL we see in the browser be for an index route?
Shoes.
Perfect. You guys, I think, have this down a little bit now. And then we'll send it to our shoe controller and our index method. So pretty straightforward. That's all we need for our route here. We can do a little quick check to make sure that we have that. I think we're going to have all of the other crazy active record routes too, but just to check. And then meanwhile, while that's doing it, I'm going to go ahead and start the server because my server takes a second. One thing that I really wanted to show you as you're going through this is similar to Sinatra. Rails is going to give you helpful error messages. So if you're trying to set something up and you aren't able to access the thing you want to access, Rails will be very helpful. And so, yeah.
Quick question.
Yes. Great time.
I've seen it both ways. The controller either as a singular or a plural. Is there like a conventional way that you should put it?
Now you're making me second guess everything, Mike, and make me wonder if I should actually be putting that as a plural because we don't have our controller yet for this.
Like, to me, it makes sense that it would be the shoes controller because it controls all the shoes.
It is the shoes controller, and so now I'm wondering if I did that incorrectly. I'm telling you, it gets
It's
really hard when you get used to using generators, because then you forget some of the shorthand syntax. I think it is plural. I actually don't know if it would work singular. So let's see if it did. I mean, it shows as our controller a shoe, but I don't know if it actually would have worked. Isn't the use index? Yeah, the folder is plural. That just made me question. So let's go ahead and add those. We're jumping ahead a little bit, but let's go ahead and add that folder, and let's add that controller. Sorry, I do this a weird way. I always write out the file name and then save it, and then I actually write my code for this. So yeah, it is plural. So I think this is going to be plural. And here we are inheriting from, how do I forget all of these things? Active. I truly have not made a
It would be
control.
application controller.
Yes, thank you. Man, the amount you second guess yourself when you haven't written it by hand in a long time. Okay, so let's see if that works. Let's see what it gives us. And I kind of wanted us to see what error messages we will get if we don't have all of the pieces built out. So if we didn't have a controller, it would have told us that it didn't have a controller. And so let's go to shoes. And I did in the routes. Okay, perfect. So that looks like a really good error. So I did in the routes make it plural. I think I would make it plural. I think plural is the correct way. So good catch on that, Mike. And then as you can see, this is why I love Rails so much, is it actually tells us what we're missing. So it's saying that it cannot find the action index. If we add the action index, we're actually going to get a little bit of a different error. And now it's saying, okay, we found your index, but we can't find the template. And if you remember, I showed you the other day that you don't actually need this here, but you only don't need it there if you happen to already have the file in place, so it can skip that step. But if it doesn't, it gives you really helpful error information. I also wanted to point out, do you guys see this black box down here? That black box is like a mini console. It's as if you have a binding pry wherever your error happened, which is incredibly helpful. So if you have an error and you get this red screen, you'll also get this box, which would let you test variables. We don't have any variables yet, but like just to kind of prove, I can do shoe.all here and I'll see all my shoes. So it's a mini console that you guys can use, and a really good way to debug as you're working through your project. And so let's go ahead and do what this is actually asking for. Let's add a template for our shoes controller to use. So in here, we'll add a new file and we'll call it index.html.erb. And I've got too many things going on up here at the top. And then this is going to be where we actually display all of our shoes. So before I write any real code, I'm a big fan of just saying like what this is. So like all the shoes. I usually don't use the keyword index in here because users don't really know the keyword. They're not expecting, here's the index of shoes. They're just expecting to see all the shoes. So let's see if it will give us all the shoes. Why is it taking so long? Let me make sure I put that in the right spot. Yeah, that looks right. Really, why is this taking so long? Oh, there we go. Okay, cool. So that's what I would always check before you add anything else, just because it makes it a little bit easier to check where your error message is. So if I wanted to display all of the shoes here, there are going to be two places that I need to add information to. What are those two places I'll need to add some info to? Maybe a better question is, how do I display all the shoes?
I believe you need to have the show method in the controller, shoes controller, so you can get the instance variable, so you can display on your view, no?
Okay, so Bruno, you mentioned something very important, and that's what I was trying to get to, is we will need our instance variable. We are going to do a show method, but we don't necessarily need a show method for our index to work. We could do an index without having a show method, but we do.
Okay. Yes, sure.
Yes. And so, great, I see Lucy gave us some code in there. To keep with convention, because you want your other coders to be able to follow along, the convention in naming these instance variables will actually just be shoes plural. And we assume that shoes plural is going to be all of the shoes. If you had a situation where you needed both all the shoes and just a user's shoes or something else, you could give them different names. But typically, conventionally speaking, in an index action, we expect to see shoes plural as our instance variable. And in any sort of dynamic route like show, edit, update, delete, we would expect to see @shoe. And that's kind of your differentiating factor. So you don't want to go off the wall and like name them weird things like my collection, because your next person might not know what that means. So we'll stick with shoes, and we'll set that equal to exactly what you said, Lucy, shoe.all, and that will give us the ability now to reference shoe.all in the index. If you forget to do this, no big deal. So I'm gonna just comment it out for the moment. If we started to code in here with shoes with that, and so it might look something like @shoes.each. We're just gonna set it up. Not gonna actually do the rest of it yet. And you hit refresh, we'll get an error message. And I just wanna show you this error message because it is the most common error message that I see students get. And it is the no method error. And it's gonna be that no method, undefined method each. This is where I say read the whole error. No undefined method each for nil class. Honestly, most common error message, just make sure you're reading this for nil class. What that means is whatever we called each on is nil or has no value and needs the value to be set. So you could even check it here. Do we have @shoes? Nope. And so we would put it in the controller. You might be wondering to yourself, couldn't I just do shoe.all here? You technically could. But it's really bad practice to allow our views to be accessing the database. We want our controller to be the in-between. And there's multiple reasons for this. One is purely like separation of concerns. Another reason is in the way things are loaded is we might want to mention @shoes multiple times. And so we would have to do shoe.all multiple times. And in doing so, we would have a ton of queries to the database and it would just be a little taxing. So it makes sense to get everything ready in the controller, serve it up to the view, and then in the view, we can use it as much as we need. So always try to think to yourself, I do not access the database in the view, I access the database in the controller. And we've got our nice little iteration set up here, and then inside we can just display some info. So we're gonna start pretty simply, and we're gonna display that method that we wrote, so brand and color. And we'll hit refresh and hopefully we'll see some good information. Cool, looks quite ugly. This is where your CSS comes into play. As you're doing labs, not CSS, the HTML, as you're doing labs, it's not absolutely crucial to be including this, but it's also not a bad practice because when you get to your project, why did I forget this down here? When you get to your project, you won't ever want to like just be displaying things like this. You can take it up a level. And we would add some color and some other pieces as well. So now at least we have them in a list and we have all of our shoes. One other really common error that I see, and I just want to point out why it happens, is I see a lot of times people putting the equals here because they're like, well, we're going to display all the shoes, or they just forget and put an equals there. And this is what your result is going to look like. And so remember, each returns the original array. Because each returns the original array, at the end, it actually displays our original array. So if you're ever wondering like, well, I've got what I want, but I got all this extra junk too, usually it's because you've included the equal sign there instead of just the why can't I think of the word for it? Percentage sign. You made it an ice cream cone when it shouldn't have been. Or is that not an ice cream? I don't know what an octopus when it should have been an ice cream cone? A squid? I don't know. But yes. Okay, cool. So now we've got all of our shoes to display. We want to do something though, this is a little bit boring. We would like it if we had a show page where we could get more info. Like maybe we could see the quality of the shoe and the price of the shoe. Yes, I could display it on this page, but we don't want it to get too messy. We'd rather have a show page. So if I want to build a show page, and I'm prefacing this to you because this is going to happen every time you want to add something, in the chat or out loud, just generally, what are the pieces that you need if you want to build a new route? More than just the route. So like maybe tell me the files that we'll need to edit to make a show page. And you don't have to give me all of them. Just give me like a few, just anything you can think of, put it in the chat. So if I said, we're going to make a show page next, what are some things we need to edit? Okay, Jesse's got one of the things. We will always need a view. For whatever we want to show, we'll need a view. We will always need to edit the controller, and we will always need to edit the routes. And so anytime you go, I want to make a new route, there are 3 places that you should be looking. Those 3 places are your routes file, your controller, and your views. And so let's go ahead and we'll, just so we have it here, we will add our view. Shoe. Shoe is kind of hard to do because it's so close to show. And so we'll have our show page. For right now, we'll just call this show. So we can see if we get there. Now we have our view. The other piece that we need is our route. And once you've written one route, it gets really easy to write your other routes because we can do a little copy pasting. And this one will be a dynamic route. So we'll define it as ID. And this one will be going to our show action. And then the last piece that you guys emphasize is we will need our route in here. And I will tell you at the moment, actually, this will work, but we aren't going to get any info because we do need that method to pass through info. So it will work without that as long as we have the view. But we need info about the shoe. So we'll set an instance variable here. And again, like I want to emphasize, we follow conventions. Convention says we name this singularly. We don't name it like found shoe or something like that. We're just going to call it shoe. And we will find it from all of the other shoes using our params. And this is something that you saw last time we had filtered into a before action. That's something that we could do here, but we don't need to yet because we only use it once. And you should never like put in this effort to make a helper method unless you're going to use it more than once. And today we are not. So we can leave this as is. And then let's actually do something in our view so we can see that. So I'm going to go back to my view. I'm going to make it so we can see everything, but it also makes it hard. And I'm going to make our header basically the same thing that we had in our index. So we're going to display the shoe brand and color. The difference is we'll have an instance variable here. That is a big thing just to keep in mind, and I think it comes with practice, but to remember that when we are inside of an iteration, we typically will still call it the same thing as on a show page, but we won't use the instance variable when we are not inside of an iteration and we pass the info straight from the controller, we will use the instance variable. So let's refresh and see if we can get some better info here. Perfect, looks good. Let's go to shoes 2. Also looks awesome. And then the other piece that we want to add here are just maybe some info about our shoe price or something like that. I don't know. We'll do our price and it's supposed to be a money sign and our condition. So I'll say condition. And then we'll have our price. This might look a little wonky, but that's okay. Yeah, let's give them 2 separate p tags. It'll just look a little bit nicer. Perfect, so there's our condition and there's our price, and we'll see that for each of those. So looks pretty good. If you were using this app one thing that might be a little bit frustrating is we don't actually have any links. So every time I've gotten somewhere, I've had to go back and forth using my URL. If you use most websites, you don't do that. You just click links because you don't necessarily know what the URL would be. So let's add some links, and I'm gonna have you guys help me do that, and we're gonna do it 2 ways. So first, let's go to our index, and the first thing that I wanna do is I wanna transform this into a clickable link. So we see Nike Black, and I can click anywhere on Nike Black and get sent to the show page. I first want us to not use link helpers, and then we're actually gonna use some of those Rail URL helpers. So I want your Sinatra brains on. In Sinatra, what did we need for a link? An A tag, perfect. So we'll just write an A tag in here. In Sinatra, whatever you wanted to be clickable was what went inside the opening and the closing A tag. And so this should, actually it might just error because I don't have an href. Yeah, it doesn't do anything yet. And then we'll add an href attribute. And what would the URL be for this? Shoes/shoe ID. And so it would look something like shoes, and this is where a lot of people get tripped up. We're inside quotes. I want you to take a second to think about it. Can I use this kind of interpolation? Think hard before you answer. Can I use that kind of interpolation here? So I'm guessing by what you're saying, Lucy, you're saying, no, I cannot use this kind of interpolation. And we cannot. And that's one thing that can be very tough as you're going through this, because we now have 2 ways to interpolate. We can either use ERB tags if we're in HTML, or if we're inside of an ERB tag, we can use Ruby interpolation. And so you have to really judge your environment and say, my environment right here, am I at this current moment inside an ERB tag? And the answer is no, we are in pure HTML. And so this kind of interpolation doesn't work. So we actually have to just use ERB tags. And what ERB tags do is they're going to give us the return value of what we're looking for. And so they'll return it as a string. So we would put like @shoe.id here. I just know that trips a lot of people up. And so I wanted to emphasize how you know which kind to use. Look to see if you're in ERB tags. And I don't know if your code editor does this. Mine is really nice. You can see it gives this white highlight if I'm in an ERB. And so that's a good indication of what kind of interpolation I can use. And so this should give us a link. Unless I have an error, which I clearly do. Undefined method.
You have @shoe instead of just
you.
shoe because you're inside the loop.
Oh my gosh, I made my own mistake I warned you guys against. Thank you, Mike. And so now we do have these links, and some of these sites we've already visited, so it leaves them, and you can see at the bottom that we have those links. The reason I wanted to do that is because we are going to now do it the other way with path helpers. So I'm just going to put a break in here. So we're going to see it twice, and the second way we're going to do it will be with our path helpers, just to kind of see the difference. And so when we think about our helpers were just using that information from routes. And I do really prefer going, let me just open this in a new tab, Rails info routes, because I think it's just easier to see than the other one. And we can look for what our helper is going to be. I'm actually really surprised this one didn't automatically give us a helper. I thought usually it does automatically give you a helper. Since it didn't, let's add one. Why not? What keyword do I need to use if I want this to have a path helper? Meaning I want this to say shoe path right here. As, the beautiful as. So we'll say as shoe. And here you don't include the path, you just say what you would want to be in front of the path. And let's see if I might have to restart my server, but let's just see if this will update without it. Beautiful. Sometimes the routes file does that for me. So now we have a path helper and we can use either of these. And so one thing that I want you to know is that this path helper, all it's doing is it is generating a URL. So we can use it in place of this because that was really messy interpolation and was a little bit hard to know what we were doing. And instead, we can do a path helper that will generate that URL for us. And so the whole thing can be interpolated instead. And we could list here our shoe path, and we could send in an argument of shoe. This is really flexible too. It will accept shoe and it will accept shoe.id because it knows when you send in an object, it needs the ID, or it can just take a number. So either way is a safe way to send in an argument. And you know whether you need an argument based on looking at the URL. If it has anything that is a dynamic route, you will need an argument. So if it has a /ID, you need an argument. If it does not, you don't need an argument. That's kind of how we judge those. So let's see if this, let's make sure I didn't mess anything up. If this works, it should. And the reason I did it like this is I just wanted you to see that all our path helper did was it generated the URL for us. I'm really big on showing you guys what this actually generates. So notice this is in our second set. It just generated shoes 1. We look at our first set. It's also shoes 1. They look identical in HTML. There is one more way we can write them, and that is using a link to helper. Is anyone in here familiar with using the link to helper? Feels like they could take a stab at how to write it. Okay, Nethelbert, can you unmute yourself and give me some instruction? What I might need to do in here?
Sure. So you're gonna, it's basically Ruby. So you're gonna use ERB tags.
Okay, so I'm gonna, is it okay if I delete everything we have and we just start from scratch? We can always copy and paste. So we are gonna be writing in Ruby, you're correct. So we'll start with ERB tags.
And then we'll write the word link_2. And the first argument would be what you want to call the link, like the body of the link.
And so we've been wanting to call the link the shoe brand color. So I'll put shoe brand color down here. And then what would my second argument be?
And the second argument would be the path. So you could either just call the instance shoe, you could say shoe path, either one. And then with shoe path, then you would put the shoe.id.
So Nethelbert brought up a really good point, and I just want to emphasize this, that there are a lot of ways you can do the exact same thing in Rails. So Rails is smart enough that if I just pass in @shoe, it knows what I'm trying to do. As crazy as it is, it assumes you're trying to go to the show page. And so let's just see, let's start with that one and we'll make it a little bit more complex in a second. We got some more links, and let's look at this Nike. It looks the exact same. Oh, no, that one didn't work. Because I put @shoe.
Yeah, yeah.
My bad. So let's see what it gives us this time. There we go. So now it looks the same as any of our other links. The other way, I don't know why, but for me, it's a little bit easier to be explicit. And every once in a while, if you're not explicit enough, you can end up in like a situation you might not want to be in, like you maybe are really trying to get to the edit and you have to be more explicit. So I just find it easier to actually write out that we're going to go to the shoe path, but that and to say that this is a shoe ID, because it helps me thinking about it to be more explicit. But there is more than one correct way to write this. And so if we refresh, we will see the exact same thing in here. And every way is the same. And so as you're learning any of these helpers, please do this in your browser to make sure you understand that the browser is just generating the plain old HTML that we could write in Sinatra. And to be honest, sometimes there's actually an advantage to writing it this way, because it's a quicker way of generating the URL than having to like find the correct, than to go through all of your routes in the way that this is working. I also want to emphasize link to is a method, and these are arguments. There are certain conventions in Ruby where sometimes we use parentheses around the arguments and sometimes we just use a space. If it helps you to think about this as arguments, you're more than welcome to add the parentheses around here. So link to is a method that is taking the argument of what do you want your A tag to say and the argument of where do you want your A tag to go, and then building your A tag for you. And so you can put it with the parentheses if that helps you think about it as well. We'll still get the same thing. Perfect, cool. So really quickly, a few other pieces that I want to add now that we have this link. I want to add 2 links that are going to just be seen on every single page. I want those 2 links to be all shoes and another link to most expensive shoe. And we are going to practice using our link to helpers, and we are going to put them in our application folder because this is similar to our layout that you've been dealing with in Sinatra. And so we're going to have 2 link tos here. And I want someone else, because we've seen it done once and it is okay to stumble through it. I want someone else to be brave and walk me through what we might want for our code when we do our link to all shoes. I have another brave soul. I'll help you along the way if someone volunteers.
I'll give it a shot.
Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna go to all shoes.
So I'm not sure if you need to just type out what you want the link to say first.
You are exactly right. So
all shoes.
Because we're not showing like last time we were trying to display something of the object, so we had to use like shoe.name or shoe.brand, but this time we just wanted to say all shoes so we can specify that. And then what would my second argument be, Mike?
So you want to send it back to the shoes index page.
And so what would my helper be for that one?
Shoes path.
Perfect. And so if we weren't sure to, we could check over here to be like, good, my index is on my shoes path. So we will add our shoes path here. Does this one need an argument?
No.
You are correct, because this route is not going to have anything that's dynamic, so we don't need an argument here. Perfect. Thank you, Mike. That wasn't so bad, was it? It's just I feel like it's hard to be brave. So perfect. We have a link, and this will take us back, and we'll see it on all pages, which is really nice. For the next one that I wanted to link to, I realized we have one more step. We don't actually have a route for it, so it'd be really hard to write a link for it. So let's add one more custom route. And this route, I want it to be shoes most expensive. We touched on this a little bit yesterday, but I want to emphasize it today. Please take a second to think about it before you respond in the chat. Will it work for us to write this on line 6, or does it need to be on a different line? That's kind of a tricky question. Writing this here on line 6, will I be able to get this to work? And now I want you to go ahead and put your answers in the chat, what you think. Yes or no. I just really like making you guys think about predictions because then you're more likely to hopefully to remember the answer at the end. So it seems like it should. It seems like I did a lot of my code correctly. If we try to navigate to this route, we're going to get a little bit of an interesting error. And I always think it's worth showing you what we'll see as an error because this might happen to you when you're coding. could not find shoe ID with most expensive. So this is a hint. If it's trying to find an ID of something crazy, that means that it's processing this as an ID, just like when we had to do new before the ID. So I'm going to add this. I'm going to put it before the ID one. And now we'll get a different error. Now we'll say we don't have a controller action called expensive. You can, and there is a lab that goes over this, you can always write custom routes. We encourage you to stay within our RESTful routing of index, show, create, new, update, destroy. But sometimes there might call for a reason to have a custom route, and you're more than welcome. Rails has the built-in features for you to add a custom route and a custom controller action and a custom path helper. And so the custom path helper will give us the ability in here to now have a different URL that we call our expensive path. And so we will go ahead and we'll add expensive here. And I'll go ahead and add a view. Like last time we talked about, if you want to add something, you need both a view and you need your controller action. To follow the conventions, even though this is going to be different than our RESTful routes, we still need our names to match. So I need this name expensive to match my controller action in here to match what I put in my routes. If I wanted to call this most expensive, I could, but then my view would also should say most expensive. And here we will just go ahead and do at shoe equals and call our most expensive option. So that in case this changes in the future, it's not hard coded, it's something that we already have access to. And I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this. We're going to go the short and fast way. We've already worked through this once, so we'll go ahead and we'll put this in here. And so it's going to look exactly the same as our show page. I'm also doing that on purpose to set it up so later we have some cool options of how to handle that. Let's make sure that's working. And then I'm going to have us add another link to it. Perfect. We are seeing the most expensive shoe. And you can see it's a little hard to see here, but our route does say most expensive at the top. So I need a different person, someone who did not help me with either of the past two routes, to help me with, I was trying to get to my application layout. This next link to path helper that we're going to do, this one is going to be to our most expensive. And we have an example right above it, so hopefully it should be less pressure. Anyone up for it that hasn't contributed yet? This is a safe space. We will not get mad if you mess anything up.
I'll try.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for
Okay.
volunteering.
Sure. So I guess you would just put what you want the link to be called. So most expensive or most expensive shoe.
Perfect.
And then the path would be most _ expensive, right?
So
Or no?
I'll show it. It would be if I had named it that.
Expensive path.
Yeah. So we would always. This is a good place to always check if you aren't sure what it's called. Perfect. And we
Cool.
just do expensive path. One last question for you. Does this one need an argument, Mary?
Let me see. It's the second one down, right? Or the third?
Yes, it's the second one.
No.
Correct, because we aren't using anything dynamic in here. We don't have that colon ID. I know it always throws people off because the format has a colon in it, but ignoring the format, as long as it doesn't have a colon, we don't need an argument. So perfect. Thank you for helping me with that. And we should see it up here. Now we've got most expensive, and we can go back to all shoes. And from there, we can go to most expensive. Beautiful. It shows up everywhere. So there is one piece we didn't get to, and I very, very much apologize. I had a feeling this might be the case. And that is, I really wanted us to also touch on form tags. That is the only thing we haven't touched upon, and it fits in really nicely with CRUD tomorrow. And so I think I'll save that instead of rushing through it. We'll deal with form tags when we look at CRUD actions tomorrow. Does anyone have any questions about things that we went over today, or the link helpers, how to make custom routes, anything like that?
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
When in your the routes
Yes.
config there, How come the most expensive tag doesn't try to grab the ID tag first?
So it reads, like in Sinatra, you know how your order mattered?
Mm-hmm.
Our order doesn't matter in the controller, but our order matters here. So when we type in a route, so if I type in shoes/1, it checks this in order. So it says, does that match /shoes? Nope, it's got extra stuff. Does that match shoes most expensive? No, it has extra. Does it match shoes ID? Sure, because really this reads as shoes/anything. And
Oh,
so
okay.
when we had these flipped, the problem was it went in order, and when these were flipped, it said, oh, does this match shoes/anything? And most expensive did match that, because even though we've said it's an ID, there's nothing in that URL to check that it's a number or something like that. It's just shoes/anything is kind of a better way to think of it, and most expensive got caught. If we do it the other way, it doesn't get caught. So anytime you want to use that same pattern, but you want to actually have some specific like /IDs, they just have to go first so that they get filtered out before it goes to the catch-all clause.
Thank you for clarifying that for me.
Yeah, great question, Mike. Any other last questions in our last minute?
Last quick question. Inside of this routes draw page, if you
Yes.
wanted to do a custom route, but with inside resources, how would that work?
I don't remember that. I've done one before and I don't remember the syntax for it. So let me cover that another time for you, Nathalbert. There's not a, there's limits. So you couldn't do like resources, shoes, and then say like only expensive. It wouldn't be able to catch that. And I did that syntax a little bit wrong. But there is a way to do it where you're saying, where you do something and you say, this is a path that will be added onto the collection, which means /shoes, and you add something. I just cannot remember for the life of me off the top of my head what it would look like. So I will get back to you or send you a resource on it, Nathalbert.
All right, thank you.
But this would not work is what I'm trying to emphasize. So you normally we write them out when we have custom ones.
Right.
Cool.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem. We are right on time at time. If you guys have any last questions, put them in the Slack. I'd be happy to answer them. And this video and the code will be updated later. And we'll continue on with this tomorrow. So thanks, guys.